the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. Some of you will be watching this. Some of you will be listening. Watchers will have seen my face, I hope at least, lots of times before. You will recognize my ugly mug. But my guest today might not. Actually, we haven't met before, but even if we knew each other intimately, my guest, Sadie Dingfelder, suffers from something called face blindness. She has a new book out about it, appropriately enough called Do I Know You? And she's joining us from Brooklyn, New York today. Sadie, congratulations on the new book. What's it like not to recognize someone? I know one of the remarkable stories in your new book, Do I Know You, is when you misrepresented your husband. You imagined he was there when he wasn't. Tell me what this face blindness is all about.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a little bit like color blindness, and that people who are colorblind can't tell the difference between colors, and I can't tell the difference between faces. But from my perspective, I'm totally normal, right? It's everyone else that's astonishingly good at recognizing faces. And it turns out that you neurotypical people have an entire chunk of brain devoted to recognizing faces and nothing else.
What does my face look like then to you? Just
well, so I can see.
I'm not fishing for compliments, of course.
I can see faces as clearly as anyone, but my problem is I don't remember them. And so, yeah, it's just like my brain tosses the information in a garbage basket. Whereas other people have this like near photographic memory for faces.
So does that play out in terms of your memory? Do you remember things, words perhaps, better, or other things better, and it's just faces you happen to forget? Or is it some sort of weird condition that you were born with? We'll talk about the science of it later in this conversation.
Yeah. About half of people who are face blind have trouble recognizing other types of things too, or have trouble remembering other types of objects. And then half of us are only bad at faces. I'm in the group that's bad at a lot of things. So I also can't tell the difference between cars or houses. I will basically try to get into any car that's red and smallish.
I don't know whether I should be laughing, Sadie, or crying.
You can
when you
totally
look in
laugh.
the mirror when you
Funny.
brush your teeth in the evening or the morning, do you recognize yourself?
So if someone could play like a very difficult but mean trick if they had someone who was sort of similar looking to me, because I don't think I would notice if someone who basically had my, hair and skin color and face shape or whatever, and if they did a good job mirroring my movements, like I wouldn't necessarily notice. I've failed to recognize myself in a mirror before. One time I was in line, or I was standing near a mirror, and I thought that it was just some other woman was just getting in my personal space, until I realized it was my own reflection.
It certainly gives new meaning or potential to the myth of Narcissus.
Yeah.
Falling in. I mean, you can't really fall in love with your own image because you don't know who you are.
It's true. And actually, I'm just very unself-conscious, I think. In part because I just simply don't think about how I look very often, unless I'm presently staring in a mirror. I just don't think about how I might look to other people. And as a result, I'm pretty disheveled a lot of the time.
Well, it doesn't matter, right? If you, although maybe does it impact on the way you think about how others see you? Do you think when you're face blind, it gives you more or less concern with your own appearance?
Yes. It's funny. My whole life, I believed that I believed that I didn't, people couldn't see me sometimes. Like I think
Mm.
I'm like a little bit invisible.
The
And
Invisible Woman. I bet you were tempted to entitle the book that, or that title has kind of been taken.
it has. But yeah, sometimes I think I can sneak into places. And the thing is, like going into places where you're not supposed to be is just a confidence game anyway. So if I'm pretty confident no one's looking at me or thinking about me or seeing me, then maybe you can kind of actually make yourself a little bit invisible.
Yeah, it kind of gives new meaning to the notion of anonymity, particularly in our digital age, where some people want to be anonymous, but it's increasingly hard to escape the cameras.
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting, um, how much technology, I mean, modern technology is so much better at face recognition than I am. But interestingly, it's not a lot better. The super recognizers, which is like the opposite of people who are face blind, they're better at recognizing faces than any of the computer vision systems that we have so far.
So, Sadie, tell us the story, because that's a central part of this new book. That's about your own experience. Do I know you? A face blind reporter's journey into the science of sight and memory and imagination. You didn't always know you were face blind, did you?
No, I had no idea. I knew that I was a little bit worse than average at recognizing faces, but I did not realize that I was in the bottom 3%. That was a real surprise. So yeah, so I was working at the Washington Post at the time, and I had a few experiences that made me start to wonder if I might have this thing called prosopagnosia, which I knew about because ironically I am a science writer and I specialize in psychology and neuroscience. So it's
You couldn't
kind
make
of,
that up, could you?
I know. So I all of a sudden it just occurred to me, gosh, maybe I'm not as neurotypical as I thought I was. But again, when I went into writing the story, I thought it was going to be one of those stories where it's like, oh, is she face blind? Oh, she's just a little below average. Well, it was still a fun story to read. But actually, I was super face blind. I was one of the worst people in the study that I participated in to begin with. And learning this about myself was such a shock. I can't even tell you. It kind of triggered a midlife crisis, honestly, and started causing me to ask a lot of questions about my life. Also, it solved a lot of long-running mysteries about my life. For instance, I've never been asked out on a date by anyone ever. um I've gone out on dates, like I ask other people out, but I realized in retrospect, and actually a few people told me too, that like we would hit it off and then I would treat them like a stranger 10 or 20 minutes later. And so I seemed very hot and cold, and made people feel very anxious about asking me out.
Yeah, that's weird. So if you went on a date with someone and for 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour you got on well,
Yeah.
and then I don't know, you went to the bathroom or you looked away and then you saw this person again, would you not recognize them? Would you have no context of a physical meeting with someone else and just kind of take it for granted that you knew who you were with?
Yeah, I mean, you could switch someone out halfway through a date with me, and I mean, first of all, my
That would be a
husband,
cruel trick, wouldn't it? One way or the other.
yeah, it would be cruel. My husband also wouldn't appreciate me going on a date probably. But back in my dating days, I regularly would have trouble finding people, like if they went to the bathroom. But the other thing though is that um I didn't realize this, but I use 1,000 different little tricks for recognizing people. And a lot of times they work pretty well. Like if you memorize someone's hairstyle or their voice or their clothes or even just their sort of general vibes. Oh, and of course, the thing that helps the most is the look in someone's eyes when they recognize you. And a lot of people, including me, a lot of face blind people will just match whatever level of familiarity that is emanating from whoever we're talking to.
Yeah, that used to happen to me. I used to give a lot of public speeches around the world, and people would often come up to me knowing me, but of course I didn't know them, partly perhaps because I might have an element of face blindness, or they're not to your extent, but partly because you meet a lot of people on the road. So one's always very sensitive about saying to someone, actually, I don't know who you are. I think there was always a fear that you would insult them, although I'm not sure whether people really are insulted. It's better to be honest and say you don't know who they are than talk to someone and have no idea who they are.
It's a hard question because I just saw a study that said that people really do feel insulted, and the amount that whether you recognize them makes people assume that you don't care about them if you don't recognize
Well,
them.
there's some truth to that. I mean, if you don't recognize them, especially if you've been on a date with them. So you mentioned you're married, and I know one of the oddest stories in the book is about your husband. How did you meet him in the first place? You said you certainly never been invited out on a date.
We met at a party, and I happened to be reading one of his favorite books and one of my own favorite books that I was rereading. And
Which
and
book?
and it's called Infinite Jest. It's by David Foster Wallace. And it was actually, he made fun of me because the book it's so long, and it was a paperback, and it's split in sections. So I only had like the first chunk, and he said, "Oh, you can't read that without having access to the end notes." And I was like, "Well, I already read the end notes. I'm just."
Isn't that required reading? Isn't that the Bible in Brooklyn? Although I know you don't live in Brooklyn, you divide your time between Washington, D.C. and West Virginia. I'm guessing most people don't read that book in West Virginia.
No, I have not seen it on any bookshelves in West Virginia. But to be fair, I think maybe it was like the thing to read in Brooklyn a little while ago. I don't know what the young.
Yeah, well, they're probably reading yours now, because I know earlier this week you had a book party for Do I Know You? So, Sadie, I got to ask you, it's such a great story.
Yeah.
What happened in the supermarket with your husband?
So I was following my husband around the supermarket because I don't really cook, so I just kind of just wander behind him while he does all the shopping. And
He's a good husband.
He's a good guy. He's a good guy. But and I looked up and I saw that he was buying all of these uncharacteristic things. He was tossing like all this junk food into our cart, including some generic peanut butter. And so I picked up the jar of generic peanut butter out of our cart, and I said, "Since when do you buy generic?" And he just looked at me, and he looked completely horrified. He looked so scared that I almost turned around to see what was spooking my. He's like 6'4". He's quite a large man. So I wanted to see what was scaring him. But actually I was scaring him because he was not my husband. He was just a husband-shaped stranger.
Did you explain to him? Did he believe you?
I didn't explain a thing. I dropped the peanut butter and I just ran off. And I like to think that, he went home to his partner and said something like, "Wow, like, when did marketing become so aggressive?"
They probably thought you were trying to introduce yourself or go on a date. So I have to ask you, Sadie, didn't this get picked up when you were growing up by your family? Do you think it's this condition of face blindness? Has it changed? Has it intensified as you've got older?
It's so funny, but really no one knew that I was face blind. My brother did say, "Well, we knew something was going on with you. We just didn't know what."
They just thought you were weird.
Yeah, like people called me spacey. Also,
as opposed to Sadie.
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't resist that one.
They call me spacey. But yeah, so they're sort of absent-minded, there's lots of sort of vague words that you can use to try to explain unusual behavior. And so, so I was just a spacey kid who was always lost. And, I would get lost on school field trips because I didn't know what my classmates looked like.
Yeah, I know. I get the sense with some of my, well, not that I have so many kids, but especially with my daughter, that she sometimes looks at me as if I'm an alien stranger. So it's a good excuse for kids to look at their parents as if they don't even know who they are.
I'm sure there's many reasons to look at your parents like they're aliens, but
you never misrepresented your your parents, you never went up to anyone in a supermarket assuming they were your mother or father?
I definitely did do that. I did that all the time, and I made all sorts of weird mistakes all the time, but, they just sort of got lumped under the generic sort of the generic idea that I'm just a weird kid.
Where did you grow up?
Oh, we moved almost every year of my life, and that might not have
Yeah,
helped
that probably didn't help either.
No, it did not help. I needed to have a small class of people to learn instead of a new group of kids every year.
But presumably kids can be very, very cruel. Was
Yeah.
this something that was at least sensed in school?
Well, so it didn't really seem to be a problem until I hit about 5th grade. And then all of a sudden I went from being like tolerably popular to like having no friends at all. I had no friends. I was so lonely. And I didn't know why all of a sudden I was having so much trouble making friends. And this was actually one of the central mysteries of my life, because later in college, I had tons of friends again. So I sort of recovered, and I didn't know what had changed. And in retrospect, what had changed was I stopped acting like everyone was a stranger and started acting like everyone was already my close personal friend. And that changed my life. I was still pretty lonely a lot of the time because I didn't know who these people were who were my friends, who were sitting on my bed talking about some boyfriend that I also don't remember hearing about. But it was a lot better. It was a big improvement from having no friends.
Sadie, you're a science reporter, and after the break, I want to get to the hard science of this, because it's a serious condition, and it's a serious, in some ways, a serious subject, although you also make it very entertaining. But I wonder, as a science journalist, someone clearly who is well-versed, steeped in science, and presumably a believer in it, whether it also suggests to you another, perhaps more metaphysical way of thinking about the world. Religious types, for example, apostles, people who think they're called. Do you think historically the kind of condition you had and these kinds of conditions may explain some of the odder episodes in our history as a species?
Interesting. I'll think on it.
Perhaps Jesus was face blind, or Moses, or
There is a
Muhammad, or
there's
some of these other
actually
characters.
Yeah, there's a passage in the Bible where there's a face blind. I don't know if he was just a follower of Jesus, and I mean he didn't recognize. They passed Jesus while they were like walking somewhere, and they didn't recognize him, and they did recognize him later. So obviously, face blindness is something that's been around forever. Humpty Dumpty in the book, the Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Humpty Dumpty very famously says, I don't know why people think that we should recognize them by their faces. Every face is the same. It's 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth.
Yeah.
He definitely is expressing the experience of face blind people.
Yeah, and it's sort of Alice in Wonderland, Sadie in Wonderland. Your view of the world is more perhaps wondrous.
Well, as I've learned about brains and how brains work, I feel like I know more. I mean, it's just miraculous how much our brains do, how much calculus and physics and all of this very difficult stuff that I certainly couldn't do consciously. We do unconsciously, tons of visual processing, and I am astounded by my brain and everyone else's brains.
It is an astonishing subject. Sadie Dingfelder's new book, Do I Know You, is astonishing in its own way. It's an astonishing autobiography of what it's like and the experience of being face-blind. I want to remind everyone that great guests like Stacey Dingfelder are brought to us because of our friends at Disorder, excellent new podcast dealing also with the unusual events, not so much personal or scientific, but political and economic in the world today. I'm going to run a short feature on the Disorder podcast, which is presented by my friend Jason Pack. And then we'll be back with Sadie Dingfelder to talk concretely about the science of face blindness. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
not working together anymore?
The United States, some European societies, are so divided.
And that we lurch from one crisis to the next without any coherent vision from our leaders.
There is this big space of disorder, and we're just kind of holding up our hands and going, well, don't know what we could do.
If so, Disorder, co-produced by Gullhanger, is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday, we bring together some of the world's leading thinkers to unpack our new era of global enduring disorder. And we move beyond the headlines to actually propose solutions out of this mess in our Ordering the Disorder segment.
How do you repair disorder? It's by becoming a community.
Search Disorder in your podcast app to listen right now.
Unpack the Disorder with Jason Pack. We are back with Stacey Dingfelder, the author of Do I Know You? Stacey, in the first half of the show, we talked about some of the more anecdotal elements of face blindness, which you cover in your book. But you are a science writer. In fact, I think the first piece you wrote was for the Washington Post, My Life with Face Blindness. So this is a scientific condition. And it's made up of all sorts of other subconditions. Something perhaps we might begin with. I've never heard of any of these terms. Prosopagnosia, if I pronounce that right, face blindness. What exactly does that mean scientifically?
Yeah, face blindness. I mean, the technical name is prosopagnosia. A lot of people have come across the word visual agnosia, which is what the man who mistook his wife for a hat had. And that's
Oliver Sacks.
Yes, Oliver Sacks wrote about her. Oliver Sacks, by the way, also had prosopagnosia. He was also face blind, and he had a lot of related conditions that I also have, including topographical dysnosia, which is just getting lost all the time, basically.
So we got prosopagnosia. I'm mispronouncing that, but I'll do my best again. Prosopagnosia, which is that the broad term for face blindness? And then what about stereo blindness? Is that the same thing or is that different?
Stereo blindness, in my case, is related to my face blindness. Stereo acuity, it's really interesting. Most people don't realize that there's anything beyond visual acuity in terms of how good of your vision is, but there is. And so depth perception is, anyway, basically people who are stereo blind like me only see out of one eye at a time. See, I'm looking out of my left eye, my right eye, my left eye, right eye. Isn't that weird? And so my brain does not know how to combine my two fields of vision into a single image. And that's something that you have to learn pretty young. At least that's what people thought. But
Sadie, let me jump in here. So
sure.
If you close one eye as you're talking to me, do you see nothing? What do you see?
My brain automatically just shifts to the eye that is.
Oh, I see. So you only ever get one channel.
Yes.
And that channel will shift depending on which eye is open.
Right. And so my world constantly is jumping.
Right, left, right.
Yeah.
Weird.
And my brain usually sort of stitches it together so I don't notice, the same way your brain edits out blinks. But not when I'm driving. When I'm driving, that shift is noticeable and alarming.
When you go down, I bet the DMV people don't know about this. They probably have a stroke. I mean, they probably wouldn't let you drive. Are you allowed to drive, for example, with these conditions?
You can. In America, you can't be a commercial driver, but you can get a regular license, even if you only have one eye, which is another way to be stereo blind. So
you can't get a job as a bus driver. What about this other condition? And again, I'm going to try and pronounce it correctly. Aphantasia. Again, these sounds like Disney films in some ways.
Yes, that's aphantasia. Great name for a disorder. Actually, maybe it's not so much a disorder as just one end of the continuum of human experience, because on the other end are the people who have hyperphantasia. And basically I can't visualize anything. I didn't realize that other people could, had a mind's eye. I thought that was a metaphor.
So there's no point in showing you a PowerPoint. It would just wash over you.
Well, I definitely enjoy the visual world when it's in front of me, but I have very poor visual memory, and I certainly cannot conjure up images in my mind's eye of my loved ones' faces, or even of a generic apple or anything.
So this other condition, which maybe brings it all together, is called SDAM, severely deficient autobiographical memory. Is that, again, along this continuum? Is it the inevitable consequence of all the other conditions you suffer? I mean, I'm not sure whether we should say suffer from, because it doesn't seem as if you're suffering that much. So at least is part of your condition.
Yeah, SDAM and aphantasia, again, are things that most people never know that they have, because you don't have anything to compare your inner experience to. But yeah, so SDAM is really interesting because I didn't realize that other people could do this sort of mental time travel to important moments from their past. And the example that I always think of is the Madeline scene in Remember.
Yeah, I was thinking of Proust myself.
Right. Okay. So I've read that book, and when I read that, I thought he was just being poetic and metaphorical. I didn't realize that he was describing a thing that actually happens to people, where some sort of sense memory triggers just a flood of remembered experience from your past.
Sadie, we've done a number of shows on neuroscience, one particularly on autism. It seems to me to be sort of a movement in some ways, if not to normalize autism, to certainly present it in a different way than scientists and the medical community have traditionally presented them. Is this, in your analysis, you're a science reporter, and in terms of your neurological condition, does it suggest that words like normal are themselves problematic?
I think normal is a great word because it has, a statistical definition. I think that, neurotypical versus neurodivergent. I mean, if you're neurodivergent on any particular dimension, that just means you're 2 standard deviations away from the mean. And you can be that way and be completely value neutral about that, So there's advantages and disadvantages to all of my conditions. I think stereo blindness and face blindness are probably more on the disorder side of things. But aphantasia, we have some real advantages to the way our brains work because we are better at abstraction. We have a little bit of an advantage when it comes to thinking about just pure ideas, because that's the way that we sort of store everything, is semantically versus as images.
And then how does it connect with this word? And I use it very much as a layperson, autism.
Okay, yeah, autism. Well, so here's the deal. All of the different labels that we have for all of our different neurodivergences, as defined, generally speaking, by the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the ICD, all of our words are total garbage, and they're going to sound very, very old-fashioned in the near future. It's going to sound like saying you had the vapors or something.
So autism for you, and I'm quoting you, is total garbage as a word.
As a word, I don't think that it is that meaningful. And the reason why, and this isn't my idea, Thomas Insel, who is the former head...
Thomas has been on the show actually a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
Was he the mental health czar in California? Very nice guy.
Yeah, he was the mental health czar of the whole United States. He headed the National Institutes of Mental Health. And he says that none of these words have any relationship to physical reality. And we sort of rush to come up with disease-like categories for things in maybe like the 70s because of, sort of things that were happening in healthcare. And in reality, though, we really don't understand how genes and environment like give rise to behavior. I mean, the brain is so complicated. It's almost 1 billion neurons, each with 1,000 connections. We're just barely scratching the surface on this. We're not going to have good categories for a while, if we ever have good categories.
Yeah, we've done some shows on neuroscience, and a couple of people have, I think it's almost a cliche that the brain is the most complicated thing in the universe. Is that, in your view, in your reading, true, or lack of reading?
I don't know about a lot else besides the brain, so I don't have a great comparison, but it's hard to think of anything more complicated than the brain. It's bonkers.
Where are we, Sadie, in the narrative of making sense of the brain? Has the game even started, to use the old baseball cliche? We were at the bottom of the first inning of the players even got to the field yet?
I was just talking to this really smart woman named Doris Tsao, who's a neuroscientist, and she was saying that she feels like they're just starting to really get traction. And she studies face recognition, and they did this amazing study where they found that like a very rich image of a face can be encoded by just 200 neurons, and they're basically using linear algebra to do it. It's so cool. So they can eavesdrop on these 200 neurons in the fusiform face area of monkeys and print out a picture of the exact face that the monkeys are looking at. You can't tell the difference.
And I'm sure you've given a lot of thought to this in our age of AI, in our age of supposedly smart machines that are supposed to mimic or perhaps even outthink the brain. We've done shows which our guests have suggested that in 5 or 10 years, machines will outthink the brain. How does this play into the AI revolution? What does your journey into the science of sight, memory, and imagination tell us about the potential or perhaps the limitations of AI, of smart machines, and of new algorithms from companies like OpenAI?
I am really struck by how computers and human brains seem to be they converge on the same or very similar solutions to the problems, of making sense of our physical reality. So I guess what I mean is, I don't know if they're going to get ahead of us, but I'm excited. Maybe they'll help us figure out this puzzle of the human brain, which is so complicated.
Do you think that for you, for example, if you wanted an AI replica, a bot that really reflected Sadie Dingfelder accurately, it would need to be one which experienced stereo blindness and SDAM and all your other conditions in the world? Do we all need our own bots that are mirrors of our particular, peculiar neurological condition?
I mean, I don't think the world needs another me. You already have me, right?
Well, you need another me if you wanted to replicate yourself, if you wanted to have somebody to keep you company, to help you with your work.
That's interesting. I have no idea. I feel like that would mess with my sense of identity. What do you think?
I certainly wouldn't want a bot like myself. I think one of me is certainly enough, probably too much. Finally, Sadie, you seem a very cheerful person, but I know you've been through quite a lot with this. We live in the age of anxiety, as one recent bestseller describes it. As we learn more and more about the brain, we live in a neuroscientific age, or an age in which neuroscience is really redefining how we think about ourselves. It's also an age where we're more and more anxious, particularly young people. Is there a connection, do you think, between all this? As we learn more and more about our brains, are we becoming more anxious? Is mental illness becoming more and more central to our existence, or are those two things coincidental?
I think that, the farther that we've gotten from our hunter-gatherer past, the more demands. We've created a world where the demands outstrip what we evolved to do, basically. And so a lot of people, when I tell people I'm face blind, very frequently people say to me, oh, I'm just terrible at names, which is obviously not the same thing, but it's what I've learned is that people have so much anxiety around forgetting names. And whereas in hunter-gatherer times, you would only have to learn like 100 people maybe. And so I think that I definitely do agree that we have created a world for ourselves that is a little bit hard on our brains. And that's what causes so much anxiety and mental health problems and other sorts of things.
Well, Sadie Dingfelder, do you know me yet? If I was to disappear for a second, would you not recognize me?
If you took off your glasses, I'd be done.
Okay, well, that's it. You're done. I'm a stranger again. I want to thank you. A wonderful guest and a wonderful book. Do I Know You? I'm going to put my glasses back on just to read the subtitle. A face-blind reporter's journey into the science of sight, memory, and imagination. Congratulations, Sadie, on the book. Best of luck. Great to have you on the show, and we'll have to have you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been so fun chatting.